Hey folks, we're back. It's Marlon Gardner, the host of the Divided States of America show. We're here weekdays noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and Twitter. You can also get replays anytime at the same places. We appreciate you tuning in. Today's show, quick takes. Steve Bannon is about to be indicted. Couy Griffin, the head of the Cowboys for Trump, unseated, lost his job. HIV drugs being denied in healthcare for religious reasons. Nuclear documents at Mar-a-Lago, and more media bias. Imagine that in our divided nation. We're here covering the most divisive topics. Here we go.
Welcome to the Divided States of America show, where your host, Marlon Gardner, takes on the most divisive issues in our divided nation. We'll sort through the best and worst of politics and culture, asking questions and looking for answers that our two-ring, two-party circus has failed to provide. And here is your host, Marlon Gardner.
Welcome back again, folks. Appreciate you tuning in. It is, Wednesday, September 7th, episode 41 of the Divided States of America show. The goal of the show is to get diverse opinions on divisive issues. There's always two sides, and sometimes there needs to be a third where we compromise, where we come up with solutions to the everyday problems Americans deal with. We deal with the culture, we deal with all sorts of things, and most often we hear it from the media, and the media, boy, we know comes with their bias. We'll talk a little bit about that later in the program, but we're here for you. You can always go to the dsashow.com if you'd like to join us on air. You can comment when you put your comments on Facebook or YouTube. I can see them on screen, add them to the program. Facebook.com/the DSA show is where there tends to be lively debate on the topics that we discuss. Not all the topics. We don't post about all of them. We're still in the early stages of the show where really the only people who should be aware are friends and family, unless you've started sharing with others. We know we're getting closer and closer to the push where we broaden the audience, add more guests, and get the interactive portion of the program going. Working out, figuring out, still testing, and using you all as guinea pigs. No, I appreciate the feedback that I get, particularly from friends and family and from new people that I don't know, in terms of what they look for in a show like this, what they want from the media. I try not to have a bias, but I know I have one. What I will commit to is being open and honest as I know to be, on every issue that we can bring up. And I'll always invite people who have different opinions and can share with me the pieces or the parts that I'm missing. Now, first up, Bannon, likely to be indicted Thursday on state charges of fraud. I am not the news. I am not a journalist. I am not someone who has gone to school to understand the investigatorial process, the writing process, the non-bias process. I'm a regular guy that happens to be interested in politics. It comes up with friends, it comes up with family, but there's always that line and a limit. There's always that concern that we could rub each other the wrong way. We could go too far. We could make it personal or get emotional. My goal here is to have the same conversations that I would love to have at Thanksgiving, but we're not supposed to have them. But with you, with more people. Again, you can always go to the dsashow.com if you'd like to chime in on the program. Again, I'm not a journalist. I come with a bias, but I also come with a hope that we can have respectful, thoughtful conversation about things that are divisive. First up, Steve Bannon, likely to be indicted on Thursday for state fraud charges connected to his role in a fundraising scheme to build a border wall. And this is according to two sources familiar with the matter. And this is years after he received a presidential pardon for a federal case. The state charges, though, will likely mirror the federal case. Listen, pardons work the way they work. If you're president, you can pardon whoever you want. I like when it's a feel-good story of innocent people or people who've redeemed themselves after serving time in prison or giving back or doing something for America that makes you even want to consider them being freed or the case going away or even clemency for that matter. But Steve Bannon was given a pardon by his buddy Donald Trump for a federal case regarding fraud for building a border wall that that, as I understand it, the money never actually went there. Now, you know who Steve Bannon is. He was the architect of Trump's 2016 election campaign and later a White House advisor who was accused of personally taking more than $1 million from what people had donated to the fundraising push that promised to secure funding in order to ensure the completion of a border wall. Bannon, of course, had his thoughts and comments about it. This is nothing more than a partisan political weaponization of the criminal justice system. Boy, the decries from people who are accused of doing things are always the same. It's almost like people who were in jail. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. Now, I'll start with saying, regardless of my bias, regardless of my questions, the interview I'd love to have with Steve Bannon, and just ask real questions. And I've listened to his podcast. I believe it's called War Room, where, I think sometimes you listen to it and you think they actually want to create a war over, I don't want to call them non-issues, but issues that I don't know that many people want to die for. And certainly issues that could be negotiated. We could come to compromise and we could get to a better place as Americans. But that's not a good shtick. That's not a good way to draw attention and get fervor and support. It is much better if the rhetoric is more rank, if it's louder, if it's more contemptuous, if it is more one-sided, if it is more biased. But again, the response when there is a criminal investigation is always that there's something wrong with it. It's never about the crime itself. It's like the prisoner who says, I'm innocent. They're all innocent. They never did anything. We've taken these excuses for so long that it really has become a thing for some people on the right to question all systems rather than be questioned by any system. And I said this probably 3 or 4 weeks ago. If people were successful in questioning our justice system and every aspect of it in every single case and with every single indictment or investigation, what would the alternative be? Where would we go, or what would we use to investigate wrongdoing? How would we separate, isolate, arrest, try, sentence, jail people who actually do wrong if we were to believe the people who want us to think every time they're accused of something, it isn't fair, it isn't right, it's purely political? Even though we know that the political side of our system doesn't get to hold criminal trials. I mean, there are some cases where, the House and Senate get involved in the impeachment process. They certainly can subpoena people. They certainly can recommend that people be indicted, that charges be filed. But the idea that a politician's involved or someone, a significant political figure or elite is involved, doesn't mean that everything that happens is the politicization and the weaponization of every charge. Some charges just exist because they believe a crime was committed. And while everybody is innocent until proven guilty, the fact that we accept these excuses endlessly, the fact that we look the other way, the fact that we ignore so much of it, I don't think that it creates a lawless society, but it creates one where people really do feel like they do not have to answer to the law. Now, there'll be the same people to point out others who have violated the law, when in reality they both should be equally handled, investigated, indicted, charged, in front of a jury of their peers, sentenced if appropriate. Again, I'm not questioning the pardon process, but when you pocket $1 million after communicating to people that you won't be making any money to build a wall that the funding didn't completely go to building a wall, if there's an investigation for fraud, let the investigation occur. I, for one, would be saying, I didn't do it. You don't have to prove that you didn't do it, but I don't know that I would always come up with an excuse about why somebody else thinks it's necessary to do it. Go through the trial. Show or watch if you didn't do it, as they can't prove that you did. The excuses, though, and the impact on the everyday person is that I don't know what the alternative would be if we believed what many would have us to believe, and that every time something goes wrong, it's a political game. It never has anything to do with an actual crime. If Steve Bannon did it and a jury of his peers convicts him, it's unfortunate that he received a pardon for committing crimes against American people, but it looks like the state of New York and Manhattan prosecutors, federal prosecutors, have a different approach. The Manhattan federal prosecutors, they can't have an approach. He was pardoned for the federal case, but the state is going to take on those particular charges. Now, Bannon, again, in his response to it, I'm proud of being the leading voice on protecting our borders and building a wall to keep our country safe from drugs and violent criminals, Bannon said. They're coming in after all of us, not only President Trump and myself, and I'm never going to stop fighting. I'll remind people there are lots of things that we need to be concerned about at our border, but coming for all of us isn't one of them. I'll repeat that. There are lots of things we need to be concerned about when we talk about our border, but them coming for all of us isn't one of them. And the reason I say that is I live in a city 20 miles from the U.S. border, the largest border crossing in our country. It is a primary source for drugs coming across. It is a source for criminals coming across. But the crisis that we feel here 20 miles from it is not such that it's the topic of most discussions. It's the center of all crime. We know per capita people coming across that border commit less crimes than those in America. Now, that doesn't include the crime of crossing the border, of course. And it's a more lengthy debate and discussion, and one where I would like to understand the impacts on more people, particularly people in other states, regarding the impact of the border crisis as it's described. But I can say this. One of the ways you're going to protect our border is not raising $25 million to pocket $1 million. That sounds more like fraud. It is alleged fraud by the state. There is no reason to pardon someone if there's no charge, and there was one forming in the federal government. I just say this for this. As we deal with politicians on the left and right, and there is no difference, there are criminals on both sides. I don't know why we don't celebrate the good ones or the people with character more and be done with people whose character is so often put in question, whose motivations are put in question. I don't know why we accept or ignore the reality of some people because they stand for what we want, such that how do you complain about other people who stand for what they want, even if they're willing to commit crimes? You don't. You point at them, you point them out, you make it clear how wrong they are. But we don't have the, integrity to do it when it's people we support. It is a reflection of our country that we allow people to continually have questions, integrity issues, charges. He's already been convicted of contempt of Congress for failing to comply to subpoenas for the January 6th hearing. And again, no one thing in many cases can be used to describe how a person is in general, but we allow a lot of stuff. And I don't care what side it's on. I don't know why we don't hold the people who want to be in leadership, the people who want to advise our leaders, to higher standards. Both sides. I don't know why we don't hold them to higher standards. I don't know, even though the two other people involved in this particular alleged crime have already pled to these charges. They're Brian Colfage and Andrew Bottolato and Timothy Shea. Again, they raised more than $25 million in crowdfunding. It's amazing where this thing ends up going. The expected indictment by the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, earlier reported by the Washington Post, comes weeks after Bannon was convicted of 2 counts of criminal contempt of Congress, as I said. It just amazes me, our standards. It doesn't matter which side. It amazes me how low our standards are for people who'd like to be in a position of leadership. Speaking of position of leadership, a judge in New Mexico on Tuesday ordered a county commissioner convicted of participating in the January 6th riot at the Capitol removed from office. Here's more on that story.
First time in more than 100 years. I'll put it another way. In more than a century. An official in the United States has been barred from holding office and barred under the Constitution's ban on insurrectionists. This is in New Mexico, where a judge is ordering the founder of the Cowboys for Trump, Couy Griffin, to be removed from his position as county commissioner. The reason? Griffin's been convicted of participating in the January 6th riot. The judge writing, Mr. Griffin engaged in that insurrection. The court therefore concludes that effective January 6, 2021, Mr. Griffin became disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment from serving. Now, according to the Department of Justice, Griffin was there. He was on the Capitol steps, well within the restricted area on January 6th when he made this video.
The people of Mar-a-Lago, they've had enough. People are ready to fair, legal elections, or this is what's working to be against you're going to get more of it.
I don't know even what to say to, if we don't get fair, and I didn't remember what he said, elections, this is what you're going to get. Sounds third worldish to me, only because most of our state secretary of states, many of the people involved in the elections have called it one of the safest in history. So if people can just decide for themselves without courts, without the legal system, that it's not, and what you're going to get is the insurrection or rioting at our nation's capital, we've got some significant problems ahead of us, because they aren't basing it on any standard. I've said 60 courts have decided in those individual cases that it wasn't what the people at January 6th riots in the Capitol in D.C. said it was, about the stealing of an election, the big lie as it's now called. Because when we do use our system, it's been determined that the premise of much of that activity was a lie. It's not true. And our leadership in the form of Trump is still not conceded. The leadership has not acknowledged that it was a fair and safe election. And they still use the anecdotal situations, ones that they tried to bring to court and failed to get any traction, are still being used to justify the big lie. Now, the reason this is of issue to me is that a judge has called it an insurrection. And as such, he's removed Couy Griffin from the Otero County Commissioner's office in New Mexico from office. So you have 60 judges who said the fraud didn't exist, and now you've got people being removed from office because there is a clause, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, that does say insurrectionists may not hold office. CNN goes on, and I didn't use the rest of the story because they go on to experts who are sharing their bias. We certainly saw the bias in the beginning of this report. Yes, it was the first time in 100 years somebody has been removed from office for insurrection. Yes, you can rephrase it and say in a century to make it seem more dramatic, but that certainly isn't just reporting the news. It's sensationalizing a part of the news to make it appear as if it is grandeur, and as opposed to just giving us the information and us all deciding. So we're going to find the bias in the media no matter where we look, but I didn't continue this particular clip because it just goes on to have people who have their own opinions. Again, this show isn't just based on mine. You're free to comment. You're free to jump on the show. Go to thedsashow.com, thedsashow.com, and you can join us on air. And likewise, you can go to comments. I see your Facebook and YouTube comments and can add them into the program. But the significance of this wasn't Couy Griffin, not his politics. The fact that he's the leader of Cowboys for Trump. Hey, listen, if you think that you get to determine what is fair and what is free, and if you don't like how something went, that you can be a part of rioting on our Capitol, you can stop or try to stop the certification of electoral votes. I hope that we go around this nation and find people and hold them accountable. Now, this flies in the face of what we talked about yesterday and the fact that Trump in a campaign speech, not a campaign speech, he hasn't announced, in a rally speech this weekend said that he would very, very seriously consider pardons for the defendants in the January 6th case. It would make it okay for people to randomly decide for themselves, I don't think this is fair. I don't think this is free. Let's riot. Protest, one thing. Outside the restricted area, peaceful protest, all for it. Peaceful marching, all for it. Should there be disruption when you believe there are causes worth standing up for? Absolutely. To the degree that it went, no. And the criminal justice system is handling that. But people deciding for themselves, it wasn't fair, it wasn't free, let's riot. I don't want that from any group for any reason in any part of our country. I've talked about Seattle and Portland. I've talked about people taking over streets, and I've talked about the absurdity of it regardless of which side that it comes from. But the significance for me in this one, we already know what the 60 courts said. Now we have courts saying that in fact it was an insurrection, and based on the Section 3, 14th Amendment of the Constitution, you cannot serve, you cannot hold office. The judge's order grabbed the attention of advocates across the country who've been pushing to use the 14th Amendment to disqualify former President Donald Trump and elected officials who worked with him seeking to overturn the 2020 election from holding office in the future. I don't know if they'll have any success with that. I don't know if it will take. What I do know is that the 14th Amendment, Section 3, allows for those who are a part of an insurrection not to hold office. Let the justice system, let juries of people's peers carry out that decision. I don't want people, by virtue of being louder or being better represented in one side of the media or the other, to be the arbiter of right and wrong, the arbiter of truth in America. We have a system for that. And again, if every time someone is accused of doing something, they start to blame the system, again, what is the alternative if you don't trust the system to go through its proper channels to decide whether or not people are guilty? Or in this case, people should or shouldn't hold office if they were a part of an insurrection. Now, you have to think about how far that could go. You have to ask yourself if the people on the inside who were looking to take on fake electors, if the people promoting the big lie, is the lie itself part of the insurrection? Was it just the physical taking or the physical entry and breaking an entry into the Capitol? Was it the attempt to get into the chamber at the same time that they were trying to certify the closest definition we have to get to understand who is ultimately falls under that definition of an insurrection as now determined by a judge to determine will there be other people who have to go from office for violating the same provisions. It'll be interesting to see where that goes. Incredibly interesting to see where that goes. There's more. Another one that impacts real people in real families, real people who get to make decisions for themselves, and there are potential solutions for those people to the decisions that they make, and there are so many decisions that we get to make that people are accountable for, but religion again is being used in an interesting way. A federal judge in Texas, and this is according to Bloomberg, a federal judge in Texas ruled that a provision of the Affordable Care Act that mandates free coverage of groundbreaking drugs that prevent HIV infections violates the religious beliefs of a Christian-owned company. U.S. Judge Reed O'Connor in Fort Worth on Wednesday granted a summary judgment to Braidwood Management in its challenge to the coverage of Gilead Sciences' Truvada and Descovy. The two pre-exposure prophylactic drugs, commonly known as PrEP, are taken by hundreds of thousands of Americans, particularly men who have sex with men. The judge, a George W. I don't know why I'm saying it, a George W. Bush appointee, I don't care. I expect all judges to be impartial regardless of who put them in the job. And if there's a question about their partiality, if there's a question about their ability to make decisions, we have a system and we have a process for that. And although many judges are appointed forever, there's still a system and process if we feel injustice is being carried out by judges on a regular basis. Certainly not the claim that I'm making here. But the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services was the defendant in the case. They didn't immediately respond. The suit was being led by Attorney Jonathan Mitchell, a Republican former Solicitor General of Texas known for his efforts to restrict abortion access in the state. Mitchell argues that the mandatory PrEP coverage forces Christians to subsidize homosexual behavior in violation of religious freedom. I'm going to read that again. Mitchell argues that the mandatory PrEP coverage forces Christians to subsidize homosexual behavior in violation of religious freedom. All it should take is one non-homosexual using the drug as a result of maybe contact, maybe being a finger stick or being poked by somebody who might have HIV, or even being in a profession where they want to take a prophylactic to prevent themselves from needing the drugs, in which case I think the religion would then be banning them. Because what it is a group, a company that doesn't want to cover that medication. They think it's against their religion, but I don't think the religion is for homosexuality. I don't think the medication is for homosexuality. I know that the medication is a prophylactic for HIV. So if so much as one person is taking that prophylactic to prevent HIV for any other reason outside of homosexuality, then that religion is being imposed on people who, number one, may not have that same religion, number two, aren't using it for the reason that that religion thinks they should get an exemption. These are those sticky things that actually affect real people. If you work for the company, you're not religious, but you want access to that medication, are they discriminating against you for not sharing their same religion? You certainly have the option to go work somewhere else. We know we have that freedom no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. But again, if so much as one person is not taking it and it falling under that religious exemption, is religion then going too far? I have said I am a man of faith. I commit sin like the next person. I'm not perfect. I don't attempt to be. Having faith doesn't even While it's an ideal, there is no requirement. There's forgiveness, there's redemption, there's a list of things, even when you have faith, through your belief system, through your faith, and how things work out for you. But I do not want to impose my faith on other people. It is not my faith that in any way, shape, or form should be imposed on you. If through my belief, through the goodness of my belief, if I can't convince you, if I can't influence you, if I can't give you information that would lead you to have that same personal relationship, that same belief, that likely, folks, is on me. I don't need the media. I don't need a company. I don't need an organization. I don't need anyone to try to rebuild my relationship, my faith. However, you certainly can be a part of that, and you can be a part of institutions that want to promote that want to help guide you, that want to teach you, that want to formulate the things within that particular belief system. But a company using religious belief to exempt people who, number one, maybe not have that religious belief, or number two, are not using it as they claimed, doesn't make sense. So it could be a real life case where a company has decided they're not covering a medication that you might need. You don't fit their religious criteria, whether it's believing it or even the use or why they think they should be exempted from it. I don't understand how we come to all of the conclusions that we do. I just know that some of those conclusions are critically divisive and they impact real people. And the fact that you can't protect yourself using healthcare that you, in large part, always have to contribute to because a company has decided that their religion is going to be imposed and they are not going to pay for something for someone who's not religious and not using it as the religion intended, I think that's wrong. Don't get me wrong. I don't think you can make people not follow their religion too. But that's them as individuals. And I think the reality for this company is unless the company itself as an entity is completely religious, I don't know how they fall under the category and get that exemption. I understand how individuals can get it. That's one of those divisive issues where I don't understand. Sometimes religion gets a pass to impose itself on people, even though there should be a separation of church and state. What I need more information on, what I need to learn more about, what I would need people to help educate me on, is how in that exemption of church and state, religions need protection such that they can go so far as to impose their religion. I know it's a catch-22. I know it's a sticky subject. But the part that I'm thinking of is the person, again, who doesn't share the religion, who needs the prophylactic, but they don't need it because of homosexual activity. Are they then now discriminating and having a religion imposed on them for a belief or a specific item that the religion doesn't want to have to cover, but doesn't fall under why the religion says they don't want to do it? So if you're not homosexual, you're not having sex with men, you want the prophylactic, how does the religion get to be imposed on you? And then there's that other part. If you are having sex with other men and it's legal, how can you not get health care? When you're carrying out legal activities, how is it possible for you to be excluded because of religion? You're not at a religious institution. You're not at a church. Where's the line and distinction when a company becomes a religion and needs the protection as well? We're going to get more into that one at some point because that one is interesting to me. And that line, Jonathan Mitchell, again, the former Republican solicitor for Texas, who's often involved in abortion access cases, argues that the mandatory pre-op coverage forces Christians to subsidize homosexual behavior. No, they're asking you to subsidize a medication. Yes, there's a connection in the frequency likely of the people who use it, but you're not subsidizing their behavior, you're subsidizing a medication for their health. I'm curious and maybe need to read the judge's decision to understand how the medication subsidizes homosexual behavior. That's interesting. But I know divisive. If it's legal to have sex with other men, if that's what people decide, doesn't matter what I believe. I don't know how they're not eligible for health care or to get coverage for that care. I don't know how you can pick and choose which groups you discriminate against. I don't know how you put religion against homosexuality and determine who, in the end, gets to have access to health care. Again, I don't know that it's subsidizing homosexuality. It's subsidizing a medication. So it's curious to see how and where that goes. Next up, Mar-a-Lago docs. Don't want to spend a lot of time. just want to ask supporters of Trump, people who've helped make excuses, and this isn't for the left or the right, this is for common sense people who don't get to make these same mistakes. I know Hillary Clinton sat in front of Congress testifying for 3 hours about this. If Trump testifies for 3 hours about having these documents, I will compare the two, apples to apples. They both did it. They both have it. They both should be convicted. Lock him up, lock her up, whatever you want to say, has to go through the normal process. But I will say this. Why, for the people who made the excuse that he could declassify documents, why would you want documents describing a foreign government's military defenses, including their nuclear capabilities, to be declassified to cover for Trump having documents at his home? Why would you want that? Is there an explanation Donald Trump could give you that would make you say, we're okay. I'm okay. I don't mind. If he needs to declassify them because he's the president and that's what he wants to do, go ahead. The foreign government's military defenses and their nuclear capabilities, that's something that everybody should have access to anyway. Can you extend your excuse to cover that? Again, not diving into Mar-a-Lago any more than to say each day we learn more about the information that was there, and the question continues. Why would you make an excuse for that information being there? And I'll go on to say some of the seized documents detail top secret U.S. operations so closely guarded that many senior national security officials are kept in the dark about it. Only the president, some members of his cabinet, or near cabinet level officials could authorize other government officials to know details of these special access programs, according to people familiar with the search who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe the sensitive details of the ongoing investigation. Not even members of the national security team. I can tell you this. Is it Trump or is it America? Is he more important than America when he's the one that puts things and people and resources and methods and ways of gathering intelligence? Is he more important than all of it would probably be the question. And not to say that you shouldn't support him, to say you do support him and he does these things. Where does that put you in that whole sort of dilemma? Can you support him and still hold him to the expectation that we not have information at his home that people even in our national security don't have access to? We know it wasn't as secure. We know there's concerns about the security. Why are you giving him a pass? If there's a Democrat doing the same thing, why give him a pass? I've said the same thing about Hillary Clinton. Why didn't the Trump administration dig further, dig deeper? Why didn't the Trump-led DOJ, Bill Barr, why didn't people go farther, do better? When they were in a position of power, if they thought that there was impropriety, inappropriate behavior, crimes committed when they were in power, because we hear so much talk about it, but the action that can be taken is through our system, and when that action isn't taken, I just don't understand why. And then people decry later on how horrible it was. You should have done something. And I would hope that there's some accountability for nuclear secrets and foreign government military defense information and methods and sources and the protection of things that should be far more important than one individual in our country. I still am yet to hear from people who formerly made excuses for all of that information being at his home as they find more and more information. They just don't speak on it anymore. It's just not a topic of conversation anymore. As we look at the divide, there has to be accountability on both sides for the divide. Yesterday, I spent almost an hour, or certainly a good portion of the time, talking about Joe Biden and his divisive speech and the accountability of losing the ability to unite people when you target them, and literally taking the name of the people he was targeting and talking about ideas and letting people self-identify could have moderated where he was, and he failed to do it. So that accountability has to be there on both sides. But when we talk about electing officials, when we talk about the people we want to represent us, why do we give them a pass when they put at risk our national intelligence? Is Donald Trump more important than the secrets he was holding at Mar-a-Lago? Basic question. And in line with the people who constantly talk about the fact that there is a media bias, and I acknowledge it regularly. I try to point it out anytime I put up a media clip. I try to acknowledge that sometimes it's journalism and they're just giving us the facts. And then there are times when I just say, that's extra. That has nothing to do with the news. That is pure commentary. That is pure opinion. When you intertwine it in the news, people who are watching get impressions that aren't wholly true. They walk around with these, they vote on these, they have conversations on these, they have hate, they have anger, they have division based on that. I also qualify it by reminding us they're for-profit businesses, and they're going to do what they need to do to make money. Fox is no different. Laura Ingraham is no different. Laura Ingraham and her Fox News guests were angered Tuesday by a Washington Post report. They criticized the story, saying Trump had a document about foreign power nuclear capabilities, which we just discussed. Ingraham accused the story's reporters of working in tandem with the government to attack Trump. If I had 5 minutes with Laura Ingraham, I would say this. Apparently there are leaks. There are people leaking the information that has been found in the investigation. Can you tell me in what world, on what planet, in what priority list, in what level of importance, a leak talking about what was found with no detail is more important than what was found and the details of it and its security? I don't know how you lead in with the leaks, and don't get me wrong, leaks are a problem. But what would have been a bigger problem would have been a leak of the information that was sitting around in Trump's desk, falling into hands of people without national security clearance, being at a lower level than national security personnel who might not have had access to the same information. The amount of excuses that our media makes to cover for things and interests that they have misleads people, and the misleading of people, along with social media having the ability to do the same thing unchecked, has created the divide. It is the source of the information. We don't have reporters. We don't have access to the senators and Congress members where we can go in, sit down, ask questions, get answers, walk out, and decide how we're going to vote. There's obviously a middleman in almost all of the information that we get. So when someone as prominent as Laura Ingraham, someone on as prominent a network as Fox News gets on and they're more concerned about the media leaks than they are what they're leaking about, the documents, where they were, the security of it, it is just another example of our media bias. It's endless. I'm going to continue to point it out. I'm going to continue to talk about it, just as I did with CNN and their opening to Couy Griffin being removed from his seat in New Mexico. I can do it in that the lead of it, the commentary about it, the additional conversation about it is about leaks. I can tell you that they didn't have the same fervor and conviction about the documents, the 18 months of negotiation, the subpoenas, the attorney who said all of the information had been turned over, the need to go back in and get it. Watch what you want. Believe what you want. But as we try to work through the divide and have thoughtful, respectful conversations about the things that make it difficult for us to avoid some of the hate, to avoid the violence, to avoid the contempt that we're having for our neighbors just by virtue of there's a D or an R at the back of their name if they're a politician, or just someone who's got the general beliefs of one side or the other. This is the catalyst of it. Are leaks an issue? Sure. Is the government working with people to do it? I guess they're the ones who have the information. I can't deny where she's going. But I can tell you that saying that we have a document about a foreign government and their nuclear capabilities is not the same as having the document with foreign government military capabilities and nuclear capabilities available for people at a resort to see. And by available, I don't mean in the storage, although they had to give them recommendations to keep it better secure. They found documents in Trump's desk, and I can't say that they found these. I don't want to mislead people. But we understand the gist of it, but we understand the number of people, by virtue of who reports it and what they say, taking on the side that it's not a big deal. He can declassify the information. He's the president. The rules don't apply to him. What? Maybe you're going to say he needs the information as a former president. Maybe you're going to tell me that the Presidential Records Act allows him to keep them when, in fact, the information belongs to the government, and the government can supply copies for his archives, for his records, for his museum, for him personally. There's just so much wrong with how things are reported, and there's so much wrong with how we accept it, and it goes on both sides, and we all know most of us accept things that we want to hear. The segment that Laura Ingraham had on her show hinged on the broad and baseless theory that Washington's Beltway media, the White House, and the Justice Department are colluding to jail Trump by any means necessary. The Biden White House has said it had no advance notice of the raid. Listen, you can connect any dot you want. I could say Laura Ingraham was involved in X, Y, and Z. Doesn't have to be true. The lawsuits against Fox and by Dominion for the claims that people made, I wish there were more of them. when people try to put information out as if it's factual. I understand people are allowed to have their opinions. They should make sure people know it's their opinions. Obviously, the things I say in this show are opinions. I don't know them all to be fact. It's just based on the information I have access to. I do my best to have access to information on the left and the right so that when I start with the conversation, I understand what both sides say. And I can do like I expect or hope the mainstream does when they get access to information. They have to draw conclusions themselves. They have to find truth themselves. It has to pass the sniff test. It has to pass muster for them in their own way of thinking, in their own logic, in their own understanding of the world, in their own assessment of people's credibility, in their own assessment of the network's credibility and the biases that exist. So they can formulate an opinion and decide how it affects and influences their lives, their families, their livelihood, their workplace, their school, whatever, their community, whatever it is they're involved in. They have to decipher all of this information. I'm going to keep pointing out media bias. I'm going to keep doing my best to avoid being that media bias. I'm going to keep doing my best to talk to you about the things that divide America. And it's very easy to say that America is divided by its media. America is divided by its leadership. America is divided by its acceptance of people whose integrity is put into question all of the time. Oftentimes, I should say. And there doesn't seem to be a point where standards apply to any of the above as long as they're feeding you what you want to hear. America is divided because people want to be. America is divided because we're not exploring beyond that. America is divided because the people who are exploring, the people in the middle, in many cases, they have to remain silent because there is no policy arm in our two-party system that moves people closer to the middle. You already know how I feel about the potential for a third party. You know how I feel of the beginnings of the forward party. Lots of things have to flesh out. But we've got to be better. If you're indicted, and it is scheduled in theory by people familiar with it, Steve Bannon's scheduled to be indicted tomorrow for fraud, pocketing the allegedly over $1 million in the $25 million raised. His partners in that endeavor have already pleaded guilty for siphoning off money from the scheme and defrauding others for their own gain. His partners in it have already pleaded guilty. I'm not quite sure how he was the isolated guy and didn't do it, but that will be flushed out through the system. State charges are going to happen. The federal charges that he was pardoned for, nothing we can do there, but the state is still going to pursue their angle. Couy Griffin was removed from his county commissioner job in New Mexico, Otero County, because the founder of Cowboys for Trump was convicted of trespassing and breached barricades outside the Capitol. He was determined by a judge to be part of an insurrection, and the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't allow for people a part of an insurrection to hold office. That affects your life when people who are in leadership participate and or think they can decide on a moment's notice what's right and wrong, and that they can barge into the Capitol and try to disrupt elections to do it. A judge in Texas has decided Christians don't have to subsidize homosexual behavior, although what he really meant was they don't have to subsidize the medication that many homosexuals use. That's where we are in America. We're in a part of America where the divide allows nuclear capabilities and military defense capabilities of foreign governments to be sitting around a former president's home, and people are going to make excuses for that. And our media, again, Laura Ingraham, more concerned about the leaks than the documents and the potential leaks that would come and the harm that it could potentially do to people in our government who gather the information to protect our nation. Is Trump bigger than our national security? Is Bannon bigger than the $1 million he's alleged to have frauded people? Is Couy Griffin bigger than the Constitution's 14th Amendment, Section 3, that says members of an insurrection, people who participate in an insurrection, can't hold public office? Is Christianity bigger than drugs to help people prevent themselves from having health issues? This stuff goes on and on. It's why we're divided. It's why this show exists. You're listening to the Divided States of America show. We're here weekdays, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and Twitter. We're here to talk about the most divisive issues in our divided nation. We appreciate you participating. We appreciate you coming back. You certainly can watch us live at those times. You can watch replays of the 41 previous episodes anytime you'd like at the same places, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. I invite you to join us in the discussion. I certainly welcome your comments. Tune in tomorrow. We'll be back with more. Can't imagine what will divide us tomorrow. And the accumulation of all of the things that we talk about on this show and the impact they have on our day-to-day lives. We'll keep exploring that. We'll keep reaching out. We'll keep talking to you about the divided states of America. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for watching the Divided States of America. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the channel. Share this video with your family and friends.